Hello everyone and welcome along to the 6th episode of My Racing Live. Thank you for tuning in as we learn a little bit more about certain people in the racing industry. And it's time to introduce our latest guest in the series via this description. And it's a man whose first job in racing was for Furlong Press, publishers of Superform, back in 1982. He joined Channel 4 Racing in 1994, becoming the lead commentator at the turn of the millennium until the switch to ITV in 2017. He's been hit on the head by a golf ball struck by Jack Nicklaus, no less. Quite a claim to fame, that one. He once turned down a share in the subsequent Grand National winner Earth Summit, and he's a big lover of cats. And surely Simon Holt, the big lover of cats, that's the most important one to highlight at the end.
Yes, I'm an animal lover, Nick. Thank you for having me along anyway. But I just find cats fascinating, and I've had a few cats down the years. Unfortunately, we had a couple of Maine Coon cats, which is the really big domestic breed, gentle giants, and they've both passed away now. But before that, I had a couple of sisters who were rescue cats, and one was Elsie and the other one was Daisy, and they didn't like each other at all. And Elsie was a professional assassin, a cold-blooded murderer, and I'd often come in from the races and find half a mouse on the hall, or a half-dead bird with its wing hanging off. And on one occasion I had this really large rat lying on the lounge floor, which was untouched but had died from sheer terror. So she was a real killer of a cat. And one morning, very sadly, we found Daisy, her hated sister, on the road, killed by a car. And I've always wondered whether Elsie pushed her or at least tricked her into crossing at the wrong time. And after that, she was queen of the castle, and she would patrol the perimeter around our houses here in her new role of head of security. And I used to just laugh at it, and she was just checking on everybody. She was an amazing cat, but she was a killer. And I think, to be honest, our last two cats, we kept them into an enclosure and kept them away from killing too many birds, because it's not nice.
Simon, what a start. What a start. I led you into that, and that's where you went. I enjoyed that. Now, obviously, this period of racing where we don't have any racing, it's a time to look back. And just a few moments ago, before we came on air, we were looking at Twitter, and the Racing TV Twitter page had put up, 13 years ago this day, Cockney Rebel winning the Guineas at Newmarket. And there it is, your commentary. It's an opportunity to really take a look down memory lane, isn't it?
Well, when you get to my age, Nick, there's plenty to look back on. I'm very proud to say, though, and that I've had a lot of great times, in races that I've been lucky enough to call, and some of them, as we're going to discuss, go back a very long way. I've been extremely fortunate to call some of the great horses of the last 20, 30 years.
And just to anyone who doesn't know, before we get going and pick out the horses that have illuminated your life in racing, the racing enthusiasm from a very young age, it wasn't a family thing. Many people, of course, will join the racing sort of fraternity through their family or get the love of it through people around them. But it was something that you had just by yourself. Is that right?
I have no idea where the interest came from, Nick. I can remember watching early Grand Nationals when I was sort of 7, 8 years old. There's nobody in the family that's really horsey. My father is quite keen on sport, but my parents did indulge my interests and they did take me racing. My father would only go on condition that he'd be allowed to sulk all afternoon, but he did take me along, and we went to Brighton and Fontwell. And my mother took me to the Cheltenham Festival in 1974, just me and her, because that was during my father's first period of what he called exile. There was going to be a second period of exile later on. Anyway, we won't go into the gory details. But she took me to the 1974 Cheltenham Festival, and it was a fantastic experience. It was the year that Captain Christie won the Gold Cup, and the big hope in the Gold Cup was Pendle. And Pendle was a hot favourite. He'd finished second the year before behind the Dickler. And this massive groan went up from the crowd when it was announced that Pendle had been brought down by High Ken. I'll never forget that. And we were in the centre course enclosure because we weren't very well off, what is now the Best Mate enclosure, and I was just perched on a bar railing, and my mother was next door, and she was fending off admirers because she was a very glamorous woman, and they weren't very welcome. But anyway, that was my first experience of the Cheltenham Festival. So I was very keen from a young age, for whatever reason.
So come on then, when it came to picking, you could have 7 horses to look back on. We've got a trainer and a jockey as well. We've picked out a couple of races, but you would have called on any number of races, a couple of decades as the commentator on network television, you know, one of the big jobs, as it were. How difficult has it been to pick out 7 highlights in amongst so many?
I think, to be honest, there aren't too many surprises here, but I think they're races and horses that people love, not just me, and that they will enjoy watching again. There's one exception later on, which is a real personal choice, but I think the others really do pick themselves. I think so anyway, and beginning with possibly the greatest Grand National horse of all time.
Beautifully teed up. 1973, the first Grand National for Red Rum.
Crisp still well clear with 2 fences left to jump in the 1973 National, and this great Australian chaser Crisp with 12 stone on his back and 10 stone 5 on the back of Red Rum, who's chasing him, and they look to have it absolutely to themselves at the second last, and Crisp is over and clear of Red Rum, who's just jumping it. A long way back in third are Spanish Steps and Hurricane Rock and Rouge Autumn, and then L'escargot, but coming to the final fence in the National now, and it's Crisp still going in great style with 12 stone on his back. He jumps it well. Red Rum is about 15 lengths behind him as he jumps it, and Dick Pittman coming to the elbow now in the National. He's got 250 yards to run, and Crisp just wandering a little off a true line now. He's beginning to lose concentration. He's been out there on his own for so long, and Red Rum is making ground on him still as they come to the line. It's a furlong to run now, 200 yards now for Crisp, and Red Rum still closing on him, and Crisp is getting very tired, and Red Rum is pounding after him. Red Rum is the one that's finishing the strongest. He's going to get up. Red Rum is going to win the National, and at the line, Red Rum has just snatched it from Crisp, and Red Rum is the winner, and Crisp is second.
Agony for Crisp, ecstasy for Red Rum, and Simon, when we picked up the clip, there's still no way Crisp can get reeled in, is there? Just at that moment, you still have to sort of disbelieve it, even all these years on, and however many times people have seen it since.
Well, of course, people have watched it many times. I have as well, and I still get emotional actually watching it because, you know, you feel for Crisp and Richard Pittman, and Richard will probably go to his grave wishing he hadn't picked his stick up, and that just sent, as Peter O'Sullivan explained, sent Crisp off wandering off a true line. I thought it was an amazing commentary because he was calling Red Rum the winner some strides before he actually got to Crisp. Whether he had a particularly good view, but you know, watching the replay, you know, it seems a remarkably good call. But it was just an incredibly dramatic horse race, and I still think it's one of the greatest races, if not the greatest race I've ever seen. And it came at a very influential time for me. I actually had 10 pence to win on Red Rum at 9-1, because in those days, even our family, who weren't really into racing, everybody had a bet on Grand National Day, and it was just a massive sporting event. And I don't know why I picked Red Rum out, but he was really the horse that sealed my interest in racing, and he's a horse that I've had a tremendous regard for when you look into his career ever since, because to win 3 Grand Nationals and finish second in 2 others, 5 consecutive appearances in the National. He would have made a 6th appearance but for a late injury, and he was a real hard-working, industrious horse because he typically would reappear in September. He'd run 9 times most seasons, and when he won the Scottish Grand National after winning the Grand National in 1974, it was his 10th race in 7 months. And when he won that Scottish National, his rider, Brian Fletcher, didn't think he should have run. He'd won the 2nd National very easily, but Brian was dead against him running in air, and eventually he would break up with Ginger McCain, and eventually, of course, Tommy Stack got the ride on Red Rum. And he said that Red Rum was half the horse in the Scottish Grand National, yet he still won. He was an incredibly tough horse, and he won those Nationals and ran so well in those Nationals at a time when the fences were truly formidable.
So in that sense, was Red Rum and the whole story around him, was he a bit of a hero to you at that young age?
Absolutely. My hero racehorse. And I think, you know, if I had to list some of these horses in order that we're going to talk about, he's definitely in the one or two at the top. I just think his achievements were exceptional, and I don't truly think that they'll ever be emulated. I know Tiger Roll has a chance of winning 3 Grand Nationals, and I really like Tiger Roll. He's an admirable horse. He's got the versatility that Red Rum had as well. But part of me kind of hopes that he doesn't win a 3rd Grand National, because I had such a regard for Red Rum. The two achievements probably aren't comparable because, of course, the race has changed, but I just think Red Rum's achievements were magnificent.
So because you loved the Grand National, you paid tribute as well to Sir Peter O'Sullivan's commentary back in 1973. You were some years away, of course, from calling any kind of race, but certainly the Grand National. When you
A few.
when you got to commentate,
I was only 9, Nick.
when you got to commentate on the Grand National for the first time, was it quite an honour?
Yes, it was. I actually shared the commentary with Graham Good, and we did the racecourse commentary. And I think it was probably Little Polvier's year. But I'd been commentating for quite a while by then, probably about 7 or 8 years before I was unleashed on the Grand National. And over the years, although I still love the National, I suppose the Cheltenham Festival is really the jumps meeting that really has captured my heart more than any others. So my interest in the National is maybe slightly not what it was, but the Cheltenham Festival is right up there.
But just stick it, we'll come to the Cheltenham Festival, but with the National, of all those that you've called, and I suppose 2013 to 2016 when Channel 4 had it, you were the main commentator on it. Is there one that sticks out that gave you the most pleasure to commentate on?
I think of the ones I've called, and I actually don't think I've called that many Grand Nationals where I've called the finish, because Graham used to call the finish in those old days, and we did the Void National that year. I think probably Many Clouds. You know, I think he was a lovely horse, wasn't he? And Leighton Aspel winning it 2 years running. I think he probably stands out for me of the Grand Nationals that I've called. The most heartbreaking for me was the defeat of Sunny Hill Boy a few years ago, which cost me a lot of money, and I'm still hurting from that. But that was probably one of the best national finishes, because Neptune Collonge, damn him, beating Sunny Hill Boy was a very, very good national winner.
Way back in 2012. We will switch to the flat now and move to the 1980s, one of the most famous horses of that era, the immortal Dancing Brave.
And hail to Roberto in the lead. Green Desert looks a big challenger in the blue jacket. Behind these Faustus, Hallgate starts to pick up ground. Vainglorious, and the favourite Dancing Brave in the white sleeves comes with a tremendously powerful run as they go down into the dip. This Dancing Brave from Green Desert, these ahead of hail to Roberto. Then comes Vainglorious. Sharood with the favourite Dancing Brave strikes the front with Dancing Brave, quickens up in the start of a very good horse in this general accident 2000. It is Dancing Brave, careful round. Starkey looked round, no danger, Dancing Brave.
That was the Guineas of 1986, and of course the story of Dancing Brave unfolded throughout that year. We'll come to that and obviously talk about the Arc, the Derby and so on, but just give me a flavour of what young, early 20s Simon Holt was doing back in 1986.
Well, I just joined the Sporting Life at the end of 1985. I mean, my career has been a series of right place, right time moments, Nick. Getting the initial job with Furlong Press in my hometown was an amazing bit of luck. And in 1985, the Racing Post was about to be launched, and that doubled the number of jobs in racing journalism. And I applied for both the Racing Post and the Sporting Life. And I was somewhat impecunious at the time, so I couldn't really afford to be too choosy. And the Sporting Life came back to me first, and I got a job on the Sporting Life Weekender starting in December 1985. And Dancing Brave was really the first major horse while I was working after I'd begun at the Life, and that 1986 season was hugely memorable, and I think memorable because it was also the Dawn Run Gold Cup year, I think, as well. So an exciting start to my career on a newspaper that I'd worked for I've read for many years.
So 1986, we saw the Guineas. Then there was that fateful derby. Of course, everybody knows the story. We could have showed that. The Eclipse, the King George, it culminated in that magnificent success in the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe in October under the late Pat Eddery. Was it quite a journey for you to be working on the sport where Dancing Brave was doing what he was doing that summer?
Yes, it was. The editor, Monty Court, was on very good terms with Guy Harwood, and I went down to Harwood's yard. Was pretty local for me in Pulborough. And at the end of the season, Monty wanted to do a big tribute to Dancing Brave. And again, I went down there and I interviewed all the people that had been connected with the horse, the farrier, the assistant trainer, head lad, vet, everybody in the yard. And we did a huge splash in the Sporting Life paying tribute because, we really did believe, I think most people believe, that he had been one of the greatest horses for some time. And of course there was a lot of controversy over his defeat in the Derby, which goes on pretty much to today. Did Greville give him too much to do? Did he just not handle the track? Was the pace against him? Was it too slow? But ultimately, he's absolutely flown home and failed to reel in Sharastani, looking a very unlucky loser. But he put matters right in the King George, though Sharastani was a bit disappointing. And then the Arc, that was just an incredible performance. And I remember we were in at the Sporting Life offices on that Sunday, and you won't believe it now, but there was one television set in the Sporting Life office, and that was in Monty Court's office. So the whole workforce crowded into the editor's office to watch Dancing Brave try to win the Arc. And I was so worried. I remember thinking at the time, as they turned for home, that Pat was almost edging inside, as if he was going to try and make a run between horses. But when he pulled Dancing Brave out, it was just extraordinary how he was able to pick up. And he had a tremendous turn of foot, and he mowed down the whole field, down the outside. And it was regarded, I think, as one of the stronger Arc fields. He beat a horse called Bearing, who was a very, very good horse in France. It was an astonishing performance. And I remember as we all emerged out of the editor's office, shaking our heads and thinking that was something special.
It was indeed. Now we'll come to a horse in the same colours a couple of decades later when we talk about other flat horses. But to you personally, as a flat performer, how high do you rank Dancing Brave among the horses that you've seen?
Well, you mentioned the one we're going to talk about later, so I would say second behind him.
Nice little reveal. And another thing I just wanted to know, you said earlier about the commentating on the Grand National Little Polbier, which was sort of 1989-ish, I think. Where was commentating on your landscape in 1986, Simon?
Well, again, talking about right place, right time, in 1987, a year later, SIS began to broadcast pictures into betting shots for the first time, and there was a desire to improve the quality of commentating, and so I did a demo tape and was very lucky to get taken on. In 1986, a year earlier, I was just concentrating on journalism. I've always really thought of myself first and foremost as a journalist, and then the commentating came along and gradually superseded the amount of journalistic work I did. But in the first few months, first year of commentating, I didn't get an awful lot of work, but it gradually built up.
Were you confident in the early days? Did you feel natural at doing it?
Well, I was asked to do a demo tape, and in those days, we didn't have these nice little smartphones where you could just sort of record your voice. And I had this great big clunky tape recorder. And I took it to Plumpton one day, and I was trying to get it to wedge inside my coat so I could have my binoculars up and the big tape recorder. And I was very shy, so I went out into the middle of the course at Plumpton and tried to record a commentary on a race, but the wind was too strong and it just ruined the sound. So I had to go into the stand and do a commentary with all the punters standing around me looking very displeased, as though I was a right idiot. Anyway, I managed to get that done, and obviously I practiced a bit on the TV, and I just found that I could do it. I didn't know that I would be able to make a long career out of it, and it's been unbelievable, really, how fortunate I've been over the years to make such a career out of it. But at the time, I just saw it as possibly another string to my bow, along with journalism.
Well, it was certainly a string to the bow by the time Best Mate won his third and final Gold Cup back in 2004.
Didn't get a good run as they race for the turns. So Rembrandt takes off out wide. They've got 2 fences left to jump. First Gold is joined by Harbour Pilot. Best Mate has got to get out of trouble and now pulls wide at the front pair. Then Sir Rembrandt wider out. Beefle Salmon is fifth. At the second last, Best Mate, great jump, and there he takes it up. And 38 years on, now Best Mate has his big chance to emulate Arkle. Heading down to the last is Best Mate from Harbour Pilot. Best Mate a half length to Harbour Pilot. So Rembrandt is back in third. Best Mate, he's a length ahead of Harbour Pilot. Starting up the hill, it's familiar territory. Best Mate from Harbour Pilot. So Rembrandt on the outside. Can he hang on? He's clinging on. Best Mate bounding away. Best Mate, 3 Gold Cups.
38 years on, and history was matched, of course. 3 Gold Cups for Arkle, 3 Gold Cups for Best Mate. You got to call on that, and of course 2002 and 2003 as well. The journey was complete by the time he won his third. The wonderful Henrietta Knight, Terry Biddlecombe combination, who you got to know pretty well as well through filming trips. Was there a massive expectation working in the television side of things building up to that Gold Cup in 04?
Oh, more than any other race I'd called up to that point. Probably as great as any race. Just the chance of emulating, such an iconic horse as Arkle. It wasn't a big field. It wasn't going to be a particularly difficult race to describe, but I certainly felt the pressure before that, and I got a bit emotionally involved, I think, as I do sometimes. I just love horse racing. I love the sport. I love the horses. And there are certain horses I get really attached to. And I did get attached to Best Mate, not least because, as you say, I got to know Henrietta Knight and Terry Biddlecombe quite well in various filming trips that we did for Channel 4. And, I mean, they were an amazing couple, really, because, Terry had what you might call an ex-certificate sense of humour, and Henrietta always comes over as this sort of slightly prim and proper lady, but she loved it. She loved the baldy jokes, and they're an amazing couple, and they gave us a lot of time, a lot of access. And the other thing about the horse, he had real star quality. He was a really good-looking horse, a beautiful horse, and he had tremendous class. I know people say that perhaps his Gold Cups weren't the best Gold Cups that he won, but you've got to still win those races, and Henrietta had the horse absolutely primed each year, and it was just a great story. I remember, I think it was after the first win, after he'd won in 2002, the Channel 4 cameraman captured a fantastic scene of Henrietta and Terry running towards each other, like a scene from a Hollywood movie on the walkway. I'm sure you've seen it, Nick, and embracing, and Terry in tears, and that was just beautifully captured. So it was a great tale, and for all his sort of rough humour, Terry was quite an emotional man, and it's interesting actually, because when I think about when he was a jockey and he used to hang around with Josh Gifford and David Nicholson infamously, and all three of them, all quite hard men, were all quite tearful. I mean, Josh was one of the most tearful men I think I've ever met, but Terry had a real softer side, and I think he was a great judge as well. And it was only when they got together, Henrietta and Terry, and they started to buy some really lovely horses. And Best Mate was a great choice.
Just interesting to pick up what you said about the pressure when it's a huge build-up race. We don't obviously have them all the time, but would you feel nervous before a call at that point?
I think now probably nervous would be putting it a bit too strongly. I'm anxious that it goes well, and you know on certain occasions that the race is going to get replayed several times, or in the case of the third Gold Cup win, many times, and you just pray that you can call it cleanly, correctly, and maybe find a few words to reflect the story and the drama at the end. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes just a simple thing like 3 Gold Cups can be very effective. Other times I've tried to be a little bit too complicated and it's all gone wrong. But no, I was very pleased with that commentary.
This is the only race that we're going to see from the Cheltenham Festival, but I found an article that you wrote a few years ago about Cheltenham and it affects the commentaries, but the love affair with it. You said, when the good ones win, I've seen hats thrown and grown men cry. When a horse falls and lies down, a pained and pensive hush ensues. And when they rise, the cheers could deafen dog walkers on Cleve Hill. Does that just about sum up your experience of the Cheltenham Festival?
Well, I think it sums up why I love the Cheltenham Festival, and I suppose jump racing has always just edged it over the flat. I love the flat. I love the flat for the pedigrees and the classics, but I think there's just a little bit more emotion involved in the jumps. And it's a bit of a cliche, but one is a sport. I think jumping is still a sport, and flat racing is very much a business. But it really comes across. I think at Cheltenham, apart from possibly in some of the corporate hospitality boxes, but it is quite a knowledgeable crowd. People that turn up every year, and they love the horses, and it saddens them when they get injured, when they get hurt, and unfortunately. What's been part of my job down the years, I have seen some really, nasty incidents, and as time's gone on, I don't know, maybe you get softer as you get older, but I feel it a little bit more, and nobody likes it, but it's part of the game. And I was watching Nick's programme on Sunday morning, and they were talking all about public perception, and nobody is really going to get into racing unless they accept the inevitability that at some stage 1 or 2 horses will die in action.
We will continue looking at the jumpers now, and starting with a couple of Goliaths of the national hunt world. Denman.
They race down towards the fourth blast. Denman is challenged by Barbershop on the far side, but another great jump from the leader. He's gone 3 lengths clear, and suddenly they're at it in behind. He's racing now towards the final open ditch. Denman by 3 lengths. His stable companion now in hot pursuit. What a friend. Barbershop in third. Niche Market in fourth. Then Gone to Lunch and Snowy Morning. 2 fences to jump. Denman is taken on by What a Friend. There's a huge weight difference. Denman by about a length. What a Friend challenging in second place. Ruby Walsh and Sam Thomas. A score to be settled. Then Barbershop and Niche Market racing towards the final fence. What a Friend is hanging. He looks awkward. Denman still fighting. Over the last. Good jump again from Denman, and he lands in front on the run for home. Denman pulling out more from What a Friend. He's under 11 stone 12. One of the great performances in jump race history. Denman by 3 lengths to What a Friend. Denman is keeping on. Another demolition job from Denman, and he wins his second Hennessy. A heroic victory.
Still makes you smile when you see that. The 2009 Hennessy Gold Cup won by Denman, his second victory in the race. And his trainer, Simon, his trainer Paul Nicholls said this was one of those great moments that I'll never forget, and I presume it's the same for you.
I still think, as I said in the commentary there, that it was one of the great jumping performances in racing history, made more so by the fact that here was a really top-class horse running in a handicap, giving the weight away, and we see this scenario all too rarely these days. I think it's a great shame that in their bid to get a horse right for the Cheltenham Festival, that some of the top trainers will try and hide their horses and just give them as easy a run as possible. But there was Denman under 11 stone 12 winning his second Hennessy off a rating, I think, of 174. I mean, it was just a marvellous performance. I remember in the commentary box that day, I used to have a spotter in Channel 4, Nikki, and she would just put me right occasionally. And she said after, she said, I think you're going to burst a corpuscle, because I got so excited. And I did get very excited listening to it back, but I think it deserved it. He was a monster horse, wasn't he? I mean, they called him the Tank. It was a really good description, and he was so tough and hardy, and of course he came back from his heart problems and came back to run some amazing races, and the clashes with Kauto Star, and it was an amazing era. You mentioned Paul Nicholls earlier, and Paul had those 4 horses, as you will remember, because we went down filming there, I recall, during that period, and he had Kauto Star, Denman, Masterminded, and Big Bucks, all in a little square, little millionaires row at the entrance to the Ditch Sheet Yard. So it was an incredible period.
We are going to go on to the other horse, of course. If you say Denman, then Kauto Star's there as well. I know that you had that little bit of extra affection for Kauto Star, but it didn't mean you couldn't love Denman as well, did it?
No, I mean, the between them, they were the 2 best staying chasers of this era. However long you want to make that era, in my time anyway, of commentating on a lot of the top races, they were just remarkable. Exceptional horses. I mean, Kauto Star, he won about 16 Grade 1s or something. Tremendous versatility, Tingle Creeks, King George's, 2 Gold Cups, and the most compelling thing in any sport, a big comeback.
Just about. We will come to him in a moment. But I just want to know, when you said about Nikki, the spotter on your commentary spotter on Channel 4 Racing back then in 2009, she was worried that you might have overdone it. Are there days when you've called something like that? There won't be that many, of course. You wouldn't do it in the week, but do you have to reach for the lozenges, for the throat sweets afterwards ever?
Well, occasionally I've gone a bit over the top, and I do cringe a little bit when that has happened. And one was a champion chase. I think it was in my first year with Channel 4 doing the main commentary, when Edredon Blur beat Direct Route in a very close finish, and I was screeching at the end. And more recently, although people seem to like it and it was a great race, last year's King George, in which Enable beat Crystal Ocean, it was a fantastic race and it was worthy of a big shout. But I don't like it when the voice cracks, as it did that day. But maybe it just reflects the emotion and the excitement of the race, and the one thing about any live sports commentary, you only get one crack at it, and you just have to go with it. How it's been at the time, and if I wanted to have another go at that King George, I'd hope that the voice wouldn't have cracked so much. But would it have been any better? I don't know. Often first takes best, isn't it?
I'd say so. Right, you're going to enjoy listening and watching to this one, Simon. The 4th Betfair chase for the magnificent Kauto Star.
4 fences left to jump, and it's Kauto Star, the 3-time Betfair Chase winner from Diamond Harry. Long run under pressure, over 4 out. Kauto Star pops over by 2 lengths. Long run is trying to chase him. He may have outstayed him in the Gold Cup. He's going to have to find something today. Approaching the 3rd last, the final open ditch, and it's Kauto Star, this chasing legend. He's over safely. Long run hasn't given up in 2nd, and now Ruby Walsh is getting to work. Weird Al is plugging on. Diamond Harry can't go on. They've got 2 fences left to jump. It's always a grueling race, the Betfair Chase. It's going to be tough. Kauto Star's over. Long run, but 3 or 4 lengths down in 2nd place. Then Weird Al. 1 fence left to go. Kauto Star's getting tired. Long run is closing just by 2 lengths now between the pair. Kauto Star from Long Run at the final fence. A brilliant jump again from Kauto Star. He's clear of Long Run as they race up towards the line, and Kauto Star, what a comeback here at Haydock. He's going to win his 4th Betfair Chase, and Kauto Star is still the king. Kauto Star wins, beat Long Run from Weird Al in 3rd, Diamond Harry 4, and time for Rupert. What a sensational comeback by Kauto Star and Ruby Walsh. A most magnificent round of jumping, and the roof has come off the stand here at Haydock.
Well, for yours truly, that's just about as good as it gets back in November 2011. Simon, what an inspired call as well. Kauto Star is still the king. Could you possibly rehearse that, or is that just spur of the moment?
I can't remember. I might have had it ready. I can't remember, to be honest. It's quite a long time ago now. I don't, it really wasn't that expected. Kauto Star actually went off 6-1 to win that day, and Long Run was a hot favourite. But I think it was the unexpectedness of it which was so exciting. You heard the sound of the crowd, the massive cheer after he jumped the last. I've never heard a cheer like that at Haydock, and I think it was the course's finest hour. And in fact, they've now got a statue of Kauto Star at the back of the grandstand. It was just a memorable day. The boss, Andrew Franklin, my boss at Channel 4, he managed to encourage AP McCoy to come up and sit next to me during the race. AP, I don't think, was riding, or maybe in the race before. And so he came in on the bends, and giving a little bit of insight. And I think we both thought turning for home, and I think he said so, and I think I agree with him on air that probably Long Run was gonna get there. He'd beaten Kauto Star in the Gold Cup in the previous spring, but he was just relentless, and his longevity was remarkable. Kauto Star, and had such a long career, and he just has this ability to keep going. And as we saw when he kept winning those King Georges, typically, he'd be in front before the end of the back straight, and he'd just run right away from the opposition. He had speed, he had the speed to win Tingle Creeks, he had the stamina to win Gold Cups, he just had it all. He was just an incredibly talented horse, and certainly the most talented chaser that I've seen, I think, slightly ahead of Denman. People will always be in two camps, Denman camp, Kauto Star, but for me, I think Kauto Star had tremendous class.
He did. He had the class, he had the brilliance, he had the speed, the stamina, the longevity. That was 6 years after his first Grade 1 win, which was the Tingle Creek Chase in 2005. Is he your favourite jumps horse of all time, then?
Well, we mentioned Red Rum earlier, and it's a close-run thing, but I'm not fooling myself. Kauto Star was a better horse than Red Rum. Red Rum wouldn't have been a Gold Cup horse. He was second in a Hennessy. He won a Scottish National. He won the Grand National under 12 stone. But Kauto Star's achievements, to surpass Desert Orchid's total of 4 wins in the King George. After that amazing comeback at Haydock, he went on to win his 5th King George at Kempton, and he looked as good as new. And in fact, one of Racing TV's correspondents, Jonathan Neeson, was doing the close-up comment that day for the Racing Post. And Jonathan, as you probably would agree, Nick, is not easily impressed. And he used the word awesome in his comment on that race and on that performance, and it was just a sensational return to form to win his 5th King George. And then of course hopes were high that maybe he could win a 3rd Gold Cup, but on the day, he was never travelling, just never travelled in the Gold Cup, and Ruby Walsh accepted it very early. And I remember calling the races as the runners went away onto the 2nd circuit, everybody was looking to the left, because that Kauto Star was being cantered back towards the walkway, and he just got a fantastic round of applause. I think people really loved him.
But just harking back to that day at Haydock, I think on the morning line that day there were 14 Grade 1s as part of the montage, because effectively I think many people thought this might be the last hurrah, the goodbye to the horse. But as you said, you only get one crack at the commentary, and there is always that great unpredictability, that unscripted element. Do you think that's what's kept your love for it over the years as well?
Well, people often ask me, do you script your commentaries? And I don't think it's a good idea, because racing is essentially a little bit unpredictable. Obviously Jim McGrath had quite a good analogy for the situation, trying to find the right words, and he said, you're like a batsman. You don't know what ball is going to be bowled, but hopefully you've got the shot to deliver whatever ball is bowled. And I thought that was quite a good analogy. So you never know really. It just was a remarkable race, because, as I say, the horse had been written off. He'd run really badly at Punchestown on his final start the previous season. And a lot of people felt he should have been retired, and Paul Nicholls was seeing enough from him, I think, the following autumn to encourage continuing. And I don't know whether you saw, because I didn't see the shot, but after the race, Nichols, he just literally punched the air, not just in celebration, but sheer vindication as well. And I love Paul because he's so competitive.
Isn't he just? These brilliant shots. Ruby Walsh with Paul Nichols and Clive Smith alongside, coming back in on Kauto Star, who won his 4th Betfair Chase in November 2011. Now, earlier we talked about Dancing Brave and rather teed up another horse in those very same colours. It won't take a genius to work this one out.
Frankel is towards the left in 3, 4, 5, 6th place at the moment under Tom Quealy, and about to break new ground over 1.25 miles. Robin Hood, Windsor Palace. The others queuing up far in the blue jacket. Sri Future, far side twice over. Frankel cruising up towards the stand side next door to St Nicholas Abbey. What a prospect here as they race towards the final quarter mile. And Frankel comes cruising through, and St Nicholas Abbey is driven along by Joseph O'Brien, and they can't get him off the bridle. Far on the far side, fighting on gamely, but now Quealy asks him to stretch, and Frankel stretches away as only he can. Frankel by 5-6 lengths to far, and St Nicholas Abbey, the crowd at York giving him a tremendous reception, a breathtaking win again, and Frankel wins the Juddmonte International almost on the bridle. Quite extraordinary.
How exciting, Simon, was it to go to the races in 2011, the classic year, and 2012 as we see him winning the Juddmonte International that August? How exciting was it to go to the races knowing you were about to call Frankel?
Well, I think every time the horse ran, Nick, it became an event, because everybody began to realise that this was an incredibly special racehorse, and he got better and better, of course. You know, as a 3-year-old, he was probably a little bit unprofessional. You know, the way he won the Guineas, sort of blazing the trail, was all very impressive. But it wasn't a particularly professional performance, and he wasn't very amenable to restraint. And I think Sir Henry Cecil's great achievement with Frankel was turning him into a much more professional racehorse when he was a 4-year-old, and that's when we saw the very best of him and saw exactly how good he was. But yeah, every time he ran it became an event, and I think that race at York, the Juddmonte International, it was his first run over 1.25 miles, and there was a huge amount of excitement about it. And I saw people at York that day that wouldn't normally go flat. I saw Henry Daly, jumps trainer, in the car park at York. I said, what on earth are you doing here? And he said, oh, I wouldn't want to miss this. I thought that was extraordinary. You know, man that's more likely to be seen at Ludlow or Bangor. There he was at York for the Juddmonte International. And, you know, it was becoming a very emotional story as well, with Sir Henry's illness. And on the day, you know, he was wearing this rather grim black hat, and you know, didn't look at all well, and you know, we were perhaps a little intrusive at times. We put the camera on him during the races, and you could see how incredibly nervous he was and edgy. And of course, it's, you know, the horse was unbeaten, and you know, it's so hard defending unbeaten records. It's almost a relief, I think, sometimes when a horse's unbeaten record comes to an end, and then after that everything's a bit more relaxed. But no, he, you know, at York it was, I think, 13 out of 13, and then of course he went on to win the Champion Stakes at Ascot. But he proved that when he was a horse that could be switched off. And I think we should pay tribute also to Tom Quealy, because okay, people will say, well, you know, he was on a horse that was one of the greatest horses of all time, but there was a pressure on it. It was almost a no-win situation for Tom, because he was, of course, expected to win, and if the horse had got beaten, it would have probably been his fault. So, you know, I did feel for him. He had a lot of pressure, and he rode the horse extremely well, particularly as a 4-year-old, when he managed to get him hooked in behind, and we saw the best of him. So it was just an amazing story. I think, rather like Kauto Star's win at Haydock, that it was probably York's finest hour, that race. Again, the atmosphere and the noise from the crowd was something else. It was a really memorable race.
And as a commentator, do you find yourself reaching for new superlatives every time he runs, because you'd have called him in, Guineas and Sussex Stakes and so on. Queen Anne's, I think you did it when he won by 11 lengths or however many, just to look for new words to describe what you're seeing.
Well, it's very difficult, isn't it, to come up with new superlatives. I remember talking to Alistair Down a few years ago, and he used to write these reports, big race reports in the Racing Post for the Sunday or the Monday. And it seemed like years when Aidan O'Brien won every single big race, and Alistair was just pondering, what more can I say about the man, and it is a bit like that, when a horse keeps on winning, what more can you say? But I don't know. He never let us down. It was just an extraordinary ability. And I think one point that's worth pointing out is the quality of the horses he beat. I mean, he made St Nicholas Abbey and Far look like selling places in the Juddmonte International. I mean, St Nicholas Abbey won 3 Coronation Cups, a Shima Classic, Breeders' Cup winner, I think. Far went on to win at Group 1 level. Yeah. And some of the other horses Frankel beat, like Celebration, went on to win a Moulin and the Marois. And Cirrus de Zegler, he beat Cirrus de Zegler, who was a legend in France, and went on to win Group 1s after Frankel beat him in the Champion Stakes. And even Nathaniel, the horse he beat in his maiden on his debut, when Nathaniel won the Eclipse and King George. So the quality of Frankel's opposition and the way he disposed of them was quite extraordinary.
All champions beaten by Frankel, right? They're all household names to begin with. This one a little more personal to Simon, the final horse in the list, and his name, Slip Sliding Away.
So they head to halfway. Digby against this near side rail with Sarangu reading out to Italian Tom and Monbrave, and the yellow jacket of Slip Sliding Away yet to be asked any sort of question as they now hurtle down to the 2 furlong marker, which is now in sight. Digby's now under quite strong pressure up this near side rail. Monbrave and Sarangu go on. Slip Sliding Away's got a lovely gap between Monbrave and Italian Tom and starts to power home as well. Digby's now looking well beaten. Monbrave and Slip Sliding Away. These two quickly come clear of Italian Tom. Slip Sliding Away. Course specialist loves it here. Crosses Monbrave slightly, but will win again. Slip Sliding Away. It is definitely Adam Kirby's day today.
Slip Sliding Away, winning at Goodwood back in 2014. It was his 4th win at Goodwood, the final win for him at that track. To anyone who doesn't know, just explain why Slip Sliding Away is in the list, Simon.
Well, I part-bred him. I was involved in some brood mares in Ireland, and frankly, we struggled a little bit. That the mares weren't very good, and this colt was actually one of the better looking ones, and but we sent him to the sales in Ireland during a real downturn, and he just didn't fetch any money, and so I made the financially dubious decision to send him into training, and we had him he ran for 6 seasons, and he won 6 races, about £40,000 in prize money, but he gave us a lot of pleasure. He was a horse, a bit, talking about Frankel, I'm not comparing Slip Sliding Away to Frankel, by the way, but he used to be very headstrong, and it was only really when he began to switch off that he became half useful. He never got to a rating much above 86, but he did us proud. He was an incredibly tough horse. He would just go into the stalls virtually unaided. He'd go for any gap. He had to be tough because he had a couple of serious injuries during his career. He fractured a pelvis, he had suspensory problems. He kept on coming back. I can't say I loved him because he wasn't a particularly friendly horse. I was very proud to have bred him and that he'd won, but he wasn't a friendly horse. I mean, you'd go into his box and give him a stroke, and you'd risk never playing the violin ever again. And he wasn't fussy who he kicked and with which leg he kicked you. He was not friendly at all. But I think it made him such a tough horse to get through his injuries and in his races. And he was actually really unlucky on a couple of other occasions when he probably should have won if he'd got half a run through. But that's the nature nature of a hold-up horse. And he loved Goodwood. I think at Goodwood, although it's a very easy course, I think they go a bit too quick sometimes. And for him, coming from behind, he could pick them off quite quickly, and it just seemed to suit him. So we enjoyed having him. But of the horses that I bred in Ireland, he probably was the best, and he was just a slightly above average handicapper.
And lastly, I think this is right. 6 times, as you said, he won. But how many of those did you commentate on?
I don't think I called him winning, actually. I know that I probably, a bad curse on him. I did commentate on him in the Stewards Cup consolation race a couple of times live on Channel 4, and it wasn't very pleasant because it was quite a hard race anyway, with plenty of runners, and of course your eye is drawn. It's one reason why I try not to have too many big bets when I'm commentating, because you're naturally drawn to the horse that you've had a bet on, or if you have an allegiance to one horse, whereas really we should be looking at all the horses and trying to describe how the race is panning out. So it wasn't very pleasant commentating. I don't think I called him winning, and he went on until he was 8, and he won in his as an 8-year-old. A race at Windsor, ridden by a certain Tom Marquand, claiming £5, who we thought was a very promising rider. Myself and Slip Sliding Away's trainer Peter Hedger, and then sadly he broke down very badly in the first furlong at Salisbury on what would have been his final start as an 8-year-old, and we were going to bring him back as a 9-year-old, and it was just he was really badly injured, and I was at Kempton preparing to commentate on 8 races, and I watched him go down at Salisbury, and that was a tough day.
Yeah, sad end, but he gave you some great memories, not least at Goodwood. Time to introduce the final 2 elements to the show. A favourite trainer, but first up, the famous favourite jockey, and it was, of course, Simon's selection, which is Lester Piggott.
Running the rail, Lucky Lindy, but it's Pursuit of Love in the lead. But here on the outside comes Lester Piggott in the white cap on Rodrigo de Triano. And as they come inside the final furlong, it's Rodrigo de Triano. More significantly, Lester Piggott's going to take his 30th Classic. Rodrigo de Triano's going to take it at the line. Rodrigo de Triano the winner.
30th Classic for Lester Piggott. I watched the coverage just very briefly earlier, Simon, and Bruff Scott put it to Lester afterwards. It's 7 years after the 29th. Perhaps we didn't think you'd get to the 30th, and Lester said, well, why not?
Well, it was his last British Classic win. He followed up Rodrigo de Triano in the Irish Guineas. I just thought he was a marvellous jockey, and growing up, his performances around Epsom in particular, everybody took note of which horse Lester rode. He was an absolute genius round there, and I thought he could be a very hard rider. He could be very hard to beat in a finish, but I used to love watching him when he won easily on a horse, riding a horse like Ardross, and with his backside perched high in the air and just sitting motionlessly. It was just something quite beautiful to watch, really. He was just a brilliant natural horseman. A bit of an oddball, I suppose. I actually did ring him up for an interview for the Weekender when he was training, and he turned me down in about 2 words and put the phone down. So most trainers these days, they're quite keen on the publicity, but he wasn't. But the race was significant for me because it was the first Classic that I had been involved with. You didn't hear it there, but I did the commentary with Jim McGrath on the course. And being the junior man, I was sent down to what used to be called the ditch commentary box, which was about 4 furlongs down the course on the dyke, on the Rowley Mile. And in those days, the ditch commentator would take the horses through the early stages and then hand back to the grandstand, in this case to Jim McGrath. But it was my first classic, and the ditch box was quite a nice place to be out there on the heath, you know, in good weather. And they don't. It's been taken down now, and nowadays races are just called by one man. But in those days, and even in the Cesarewitch, I think occasionally there were 3 commentators when it used to be covered by ITV and even perhaps by Channel 4 in the early days. So that was my first classic commentary, albeit a bit player.
And what a big race it was, the 30th Classic for Leicester Piggott. We move on to the favourite trainer and one who's rather shaped the landscape over the last 20 years or so, Aidan O'Brien.
Giants Causeway, Calanese looks very strong out wide, challenging wider out, and that may be a sensible ploy here. Giants Causeway possibly can't see him, they're not close together, and he battles hard if he can get a target, but it's Calanese and Giants Causeway as they run to the final furlong. Giants Causeway is battling well, Calanese on the near side, Calanese's just in front of Giants Causeway, so they fight again. It's Calanese and Giants Causeway at the line. Oh, Giants Causeway maybe, but it's very close from Calanese. What a fight again.
Well, that was the narrative, wasn't it, Simon? We've got 20 years ago to highlight the race for Aidan O'Brien, the summer of 2000, but the narrative was that Calanese and Giants Causeway, they were having the rematch after the Coral Eclipse, 6 weeks earlier, and another brilliant result.
Yes, and it was my first season as main commentator for Channel 4, and Giants Causeway was, you know, one of the stars of that season. He'd actually been beaten in both his guineas, but he really developed, and he earned the nickname the Iron Horse because he was just so incredibly tough and hard to beat in a close finish. And of course, George Duffield won on him. Was that right? George Duffield won on him in the Eclipse at you know, aged about 82. You know, the season went on, and Giants Causeway was just, you know, fantastic. And I think he typified the way Aidan O'Brien over all these years has managed to keep horses on the go, to get them to improve through their 3-year-old season in particular. And you know, it's just really astonishing what he's achieved, and what he hasn't won. You know, you could probably count on just 2 or 3 fingers. You know, he's not won a Kentucky Derby. The Breeders' Cup Classic's been a bit elusive, and the Melbourne Cup. He's won a Cox Plate. He's won races all around the world. He's won just about every race there is to win in Britain and Ireland. I think something like 10 2,000 guineas. Now, I know other trainers will say, well, you know, he gets some great raw material. But you've still got to deliver, and he has delivered in spades for his paymasters. And you've got to get those horses right for the big day. And often, you know, a horse that runs in the Derby, he only has 1 crack at a Derby. And so you've got to get it right. And okay, he goes in a bit mob-handed these days, but that's another aspect I like about the operation, is that they are at least breeding these horses, these middle distance staying horses, at a time when the industry really needs them. And Godolphin do the same, and a few other Juddmonte as well. And we don't want to be in a situation in Britain like in Australia, where they can barely breed a stayer, and where all the main contestants in their big race, the Melbourne Cup, are usually imported. We don't want to be in a situation like that. So full marks to some of these outfits, including Coolmore, for breeding, continuing to breed these middle distance staying horses. But also I think Aidan, you know, I don't know him really very well at all. He just seems an extremely pleasant man. There's no condescension about him. Sometimes some trainers, you know, sort of look down on us media folk, you know, but he's just normal. I'm sure he's very hard driven. You know, he's a workaholic and probably has a system at Ballydor which has got to be adhered to, and he works his horses hard, but they just last. They keep on doing it. And you look at horses like Magic Wand and Magical last season. Both had really hard campaigns, but they kept on delivering.
Sheer admiration then for Aidan O'Brien and the team at Ballydor and Coolmore. Right, final 45 seconds, I'm afraid to say, of the show. Thank you. Have you enjoyed doing it, Simon?
It's been a pleasure. Yeah, it feels like being on Desert Island Discs. So thanks very much. You know, I've enjoyed it. I mean, I think you know, trips down memory lane are always fun, and what no better time than at the moment to look back on some of the great races, since there's no live racing going on, but let's hope it happens soon.
Absolutely right. Simon, keep safe. Well, thank you very much, and thank you to you at home for watching the latest instalment of My Racing Life. We'll see you again very soon.